I think we can all agree that one of the worst feelings is looking at your phone's battery percentage and realizing it's either almost dead, or when you're out and about seeing that it's not going to make it through whatever activity you're doing and you're going to have to just restrict your phone usage. It sucks. But there are some things you can do to improve your phone's battery life on a day-to-day basis, so that's what we're going to go over. Now, there's no magic pill to magically double your phone battery life for free or anything like that, unfortunately, but there are a set of best practices, some of which you probably already know, and when you combine these all together, then they can make a big difference. So in this video, we're going to go over 7 different things that will improve your phone's battery life, so how long it will last on a given charge, and then afterwards, we can go over a couple things to improve your phone battery's longevity, so how well it can hold a charge over time and charge to its maximum capacity that it can as if it was brand new. So to start off with how to improve your battery life, a couple things you can do that are really obvious. I'm just going to combine these into one because they're so obvious, and one of them is to lower the screen brightness. Obviously, your screen uses up a ton of battery, so if you lower the brightness, it's going to last longer. And the other thing is using the low power mode, battery saving mode on Android and iOS. Obviously, that's going to reduce background usage and improve battery life. So I'm sure you know those. Let's move on. Now, next up, number 2, this one is way more relevant now because so many phones use OLED these days, and that is if your phone has an OLED screen, then use dark mode theme for either iOS or Android. They both have dark modes now. And to understand why this is, you have to understand the difference between an LCD screen and an OLED screen. So with an LCD screen, it typically has an LED backlight, and the brightness of the screen that you set will determine how bright that backlight is, but what actually determines the colors on the screen, whether it's white, black, blue, green, red, or whatever, has to do with some crystals in the display that switch on and off, but that backlight stays constant across the entire screen. So even if something on the screen is black, then the backlight behind those black pixels is still on. So if you have an LCD screen, even if the whole screen is black, then the backlight is still on, so you're still using as much battery as if the whole screen was white. Now with OLED, this is very different, where each individual pixel lights itself. So if you have a completely black screen, that just means that all the pixels are off. If you have a completely white screen, that means that all the pixels are on, and it is made up of subpixels, red, green, blue, so that means if it's white, technically, then all 3 subpixels are on, but you get the idea. Basically, this means that if you have dark parts of the screen and white parts of the screen, then the dark parts of the screen are just going to have the pixels off. So an example, theoretically, this is a very rough example, it's not going to be exact, but say you had an OLED screen where half the image was black and half of it was white, that theoretically would use half the power as an LCD screen, no matter what the colors on the LCD screen are. But the takeaway of this is if you're using dark mode on your phone, then it's going to have way more dark pixels more often, which means that much more often it's going to be using less battery than it would if it was light mode. So if you switch to a dark mode on your phone, you might notice a big difference. And also a lot of apps these days individually have dark modes built in, so you can try enabling it on those as well. So try it out, you'll probably see a difference. All right, so moving on, the next thing you can do is if you have the ability to connect to a Wi-Fi access point instead of just using cellular data, do that. Because using Wi-Fi for data uses significantly less power than the cellular radios for a lot of reasons, including having to broadcast shorter distances from the Wi-Fi access point than some tower really far away, because the Wi-Fi access point is going to be producing a stronger signal. A lot of reasons. You probably have experienced this yourself in any case. So if you are at home or you're at a friend's house, ask them for the Wi-Fi password. Obviously, I would not usually recommend using public Wi-Fi hotspots unless it's secure. But if you are somewhere that has a secure Wi-Fi hotspot, then I would recommend just using Wi-Fi if you can. Now, that being said, the next point is if you are out somewhere and you don't have any Wi-Fi available and you're just going to use cellular and you know that, then turn off the Wi-Fi antenna using the quick settings. Both Android and iOS have this option, because having that Wi-Fi radio on is obviously going to be using more power than if it was off. So if you know that you're not going to be connecting to any Wi-Fi, just turn it off until you get somewhere where you will be using Wi-Fi. Of course, just don't forget to turn it back on when you do get home or whatever. The next thing you do will take a little bit of investigation, and that is to figure out which apps are actually using the most battery, like in the background, for example. And both Android and iOS have the ability to do this, but if you go into the settings, usually the battery settings, you'll be able to see a list of all the apps that have used whatever percentage of battery since the last charging cycle you did. So you can look through this and judge for yourself which apps you think have been using more battery than they should. So if you've been using YouTube and watching videos all day and you see it has been using those battery, then that makes sense. But if you see Instagram on there, or Facebook is another bad one, and you have not been using those apps, then you could say, wait a minute, those have been doing stuff in the background. Obviously, I don't want those using energy. And you can either go into the settings to restrict background usage, disable notifications, or just completely uninstall them. But again, there's not really any hard or fast rule for determining what battery percentage is too much. You just kind of have to go from experience for what your phone tends to use up for which app, because obviously something like YouTube, where it's doing video encoding, is going to use up a lot more than your email. Speaking of emails though, the next thing you can do is go into your settings and change how often your phone checks for new emails, or if it checks at all. So in iOS, for example, in the passwords and account settings, you can choose between push or fetch for all sorts of different accounts. So for example, push is basically like it will be constantly checking for new updates from whatever accounts you're using. And when it updates it and receives a new email, it'll either notify you or update the email in your account. Whereas if it's fetch, it will use a schedule, which is also in the settings, at least on iOS. And so every 15 minutes or whatever, it will go out and fetch the emails only on that schedule. Or you can set it to manual, where only when you go into the emails app and refresh it will it check. And that's usually what I do. I don't like getting email notifications. I just want to get it when I go into the app. I don't need notifications like I would for a text message, so you could just set it for that and or any other accounts. And also, most apps also have the ability to select whether you want push notifications or not for that particular app in the settings. So if you do notice an app keeps sending notifications and it happens to be using a lot of battery or whatever, then you can disable it. Or even if you notice an app using a lot of background energy, and even if it's not getting a lot of notifications, well, it might still be checking for them, so you can try to disable push notifications for that and see if that helps at all. All right, now finally, number 7 is possibly the most effective thing you can do to improve your phone's battery life, depending on how old your phone is, and that is to replace the battery. Yes, it's not free, so you might not like that, but if you have a very old phone, chances are the battery has degraded over time, like all batteries do. So you can actually check this in your iOS settings. I don't believe Android has a built-in way to do this in any way, but on iOS, you can actually check the battery health. And if it's below like 85%, maybe even 90% or so, then that shows you basically how much reduced maximum charge your phone has since it was new. So if your phone, if it's Android and it's just really old, or if it's an iPhone and you look and see the battery health is really low and you just know it doesn't hold a charge very well, then probably the best thing you can do is to replace the battery. Now with iPhone, it does cost a little bit of money, so it's going to be either $50 or $70 to replace it at the Apple Store. They'll do it for you. And for Android, it's really going to depend on your phone's manufacturer. I know for Samsung, which is probably the most popular, you can actually go to some stores. I think even like Best Buy is an authorized repair shop for Samsung phones, some of them at least, which can do battery repairs. So I would just go on Google and search your phone manufacturer, battery replacement, authorized repair, something like that, or even really any phone repair shop can probably do a battery replacement, and probably will actually be cheaper, I would suspect, for Android phones than on iPhone. But if you do notice that your phone is not holding a charge as well as it used to, then you could probably see a huge difference in battery performance after you replace it. Now, like I mentioned, all lithium batteries that are in phones are going to degrade over time. There's no way to avoid that completely, but there are a couple things you can do to improve the longevity of them over time. So one of these things is to avoid fast charging if you don't need to use it. So if you're charging your phone every night, then just use a slow charger or wireless charging or something that charges a little bit slower, where you don't need it to be charging immediately after you fall asleep, obviously, because fast charging is going to be putting a little bit of extra stress on that battery because it's going to force the chemical reactions to happen faster. It might degrade the battery significantly faster if you use it all the time, whereas if you just use regular or slow charging, then that will help it. Obviously, I would not worry about using fast charging if like you really do need to charge your phone up before going somewhere. By all means, use the fast charger. It's not going to really make a difference if you use it even regularly, just as long as you're not doing it all the time. Another thing you can do, at least on iPhone, is to try out the new optimized charging feature. I believe this is still in beta on iOS, but basically what this does is it will learn how your charging habits are, especially at night and when you wake up, and it will attempt to basically charge your phone up to like 80% and then hold it there and then continue charging the rest of the 20% so that whenever you wake up again, normally it'll be at 100%. So basically it makes it so over the life of the phone, it spends less time at 100% charge and maybe slightly more time at 80%. And that's because when phones are at 100% all the time, it might degrade a little bit faster. So it could make a slight difference if you have your phone for a very long time. But this might not work or be even worth it if you have a unsteady sleep schedule where you wake up a couple hours earlier or later, depending on the day or whatever. Then it might not know when to stop or start charging, so it might not even do it. But that's going to be up to your experience. So hopefully this was helpful. If you use Android and you want to keep watching, the next video I'd recommend is 10 tips to make your Android phone faster. So I definitely recommend that. I'll put that link right here. You can just click on. So thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.